Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for joining us for one of our talks today. I'm so excited today to be joined by the fantastic Harley Quinn Smith to talk all about her latest series, Cruel Summer. And the first thing that I wanted to dive into is how your character development process really shifted and altered for a show like this, because you're developing a character who goes through a lot of emotional and personal changes over the course of 3 years. And so you have to be connected with all of those moments in her, but also find ways in which she's going to be a different person at each point. So how did that really shift from the way that you've developed a lot of characters in the past?
Yeah, it's definitely different. I describe it as the greatest challenge I've ever been given, but it's also the greatest gift. I feel like there are very few opportunities as an actor to be able to portray a character in 3 different parts of their life, especially 3 developmental parts of their life, because they're all teenagers too, which is already such a crazy time in everyone's life. So then to be able to show your character 3 different years as a teenager, it's crazy. So I mean, it's definitely different. It takes a lot more mental organization than other characters. I'm someone who practices the Adler method. So I'm someone who's like crazy about figuring out a background, becoming a different person. I completely removed myself from the process while acting. So it was so incredible to get to develop a character in 3 different years, and it included lots of notes, many sides and notebook pages filled with ideas and thoughts, and lots of discussions with Tia Napolitano, the showrunner, Bill Purple, the directing producer, and then every director for each episode. I would always come to set, and I felt so annoying, but I would come to set and I would be like, okay, so here's what I'm thinking, like with pages of notes. Be like, this is where I think Mallory is in this scene, but in this year, and stuff like that. So a lot of discussions, but it was absolutely amazing.
And within that, what were some of the most crucial spaces that Tia in particular was able to really help guide who Mallory was going to be on screen through the conversations that you had together beyond the scripts?
I think Mallory carries a lot with her, which you'll see more throughout the series, but she has a lot going on internally. And so to guide that, to kind of show without showing what's going on in her head, I needed guidance, and I was so lucky that Tia was there to give me such guidance, because it becomes very complicated sometimes when you're trying to, especially with a show like this where there's so much suspense and mystery to it, and many secrets that come out every episode. Like, to kind of keep all of that organized in your head is a lot, and you often need assistance to kind of just be like, this is what's happening here, right? So she was an amazing guidance in that for me.
I feel like the writer's room must look like they're trying to catch a serial killer with like massive threads going between all the characters.
Oh, literally, I can't imagine like the types of like notes and like graphs and and everything that the writer's room has for each character.
But with that idea, with what you were saying about how every single episode, there's so many more details and so many more secrets revealed. So we know more, but yet we also know that we know less a lot of the time. And it's also not very clear when and where characters are being truthful about things as well. And so were there a lot of conversations about ways in which to give the audience just enough information about your character bit by bit, but to make sure that you were never giving too much detail, particularly early on?
Absolutely. I think that's actually one of the greatest challenges for the actors on Cruel Summer, is like figuring out what is too much and what is not enough. Because they're just I always say that this show demands your attention. Like, it's not a show. I'm definitely guilty of watching TV and like being on my phone or like having a conversation or something. But if you are not watching the show like every moment of it, you're most likely going to miss some very important details. This is absolutely the most detailed project I've ever been a part of. And a lot of those details give insight to the rest of the season. So I think, figuring out how much detail to give, how much to share and things like that, that was a great challenge as well.
Yeah. And in terms of going back to your character's backstory, so much of her time on screen is through the eyes of her friendship with Jeanette and with Vince. And that's a really crucial part of who she is. And it feels like they've all grown up right next door to each other, and they've been part of everyday life at school, at home, that they spend every second together, until they later are no longer as close as they were at the beginning, which we learn pretty fast on in that first episode. And so how much were you able to start developing out what that relationship and what that dynamic was going to look like and what that history was, versus how much you really needed to wait till you were on set with the two of them to figure it out within the group dynamic together?
Well, the two of them are two of my best friends in real life as well. And honestly, everybody on the show, like, I feel so lucky, because I genuinely love everyone with my whole heart. So that made it easy. But I think what occurred to me, it didn't really occur to me while filming the pilot, because there was a large amount of time between filming the pilot and the rest of the series. It was about a year because of COVID. But what I figured out while filming the series is Mallory's family and home life is pure shit. So her friends are everything to her. Her friends are kind of all she has in a way. Which is why losing Jeanette as a friend is not, it is like a catastrophic disaster to Mallory. It's like it's losing her everything. So that's something that kind of occurred to me more while filming the rest of the series, is just how really her friends are her entire life. And she doesn't have a lot of friends, so like the friends that she literally has two friends in 93. Yeah, that's that her friends are her whole world.
Yeah. And with that being the case of her home life being a space that doesn't feel comfortable and doesn't feel safe to her, it also feels like she kind of reveals that a little bit, but actually still keeps a lot of that very close to her chest. And we learn a little bit more about that later on in the series. And so how did you determine where she was going to let people into her world in that way, and the types of things that she really would just keep to herself and not really express to anyone else?
Yeah, I think Mallory is she's such an interesting person. I also just I just really love her as a person, because I just find her so multi-dimensional, because she's very confident in who she is, which is something I'm not really. So it was really cool to explore what that looks like. But that being said, she also has a lot to figure out, and she also she is closed off. I think she has a hard time letting people in, because of her growing up. And I also just think that's who she is as a person. She's very blunt, and so she seems very, because she is very, very honest, in a lot of ways, incredibly so, to the point that like it's very passive aggressive and rude sometimes. So she's extremely blunt and honest in that way, but she has a difficult time sharing what's going on a deeper level. So she doesn't really let herself ever be vulnerable. So I think that's just really interesting that in some ways she's so honest, in others she is very closed off.
Yeah. And you touched upon this a little bit before in how she's going through a lot of monumental changes as a teenager throughout that time period. And, you know, anyone without the circumstances of what happens in this community would change monumentally at that point in life anyway. And we go from kind of an early scene where she's holding marijuana in her hands and it's clear that that's the closest she's ever been to any drugs, and her friends have no idea what to do with it. And there's a very sweet naivety. And then, you know, we see a moment later on, year-wise, when Kate's mother confronts her about something and she very much holds her ground and is happy to give everything back that she's receiving from this woman. And so how did you kind of shape that dynamic of the slight naivety that she has early on, and then the way that she really was going to find a lot more of that inner self-confidence?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that's explored for every character over these 3 years. Everybody just keeps getting progressively less innocent, which is really interesting to watch, and some characters way more than others, except for Vince, who I feel like is just pure and perfect. But I feel like everybody else just progressively gets less innocent, which I guess is also just like what happens when you're a teenager, but dealing with some heavy topics. So I think, and it's so cool to watch the other characters as well, because like you said, you see Kate like really stand her own with her mom Joy, and in '93 she's just kind of she's kind of Joy's puppet. And you just see her become like this badass version of Kate, which is really awesome. And I think a lot of characters go through that evolution. And yeah, I think Mallory does too. She enters, I mean, it's interesting because I think in some ways, like I think Mallory knew who she was from like a very early age. So she's very much like still herself. But what changes through the years is what she's experienced and what she goes through. And that changes her. But it's cool to go from like being this '93 version of Mallory, who's very like her outfits are like 3 patterns at once, like a plaid pant, a striped shirt, and like a floral button down, or like something like, I don't know. I feel like '93 she's really trying to figure out who she is. And in '95 she like evolves into this very grunge, just really badass version of herself, which I love so much.
No, I love so much how the costumes aren't just there as a period piece and a fun throwback, that they really tell you so much about the character. And with Mallory, it's her costume. It's, you know, what color does she have in her hair? How much of it does she have? What makeup is she wearing? How is she applying it on her face? And so I wanted to ask you about working with all of those departments with costume, hair, and makeup, and really figuring out the character aesthetics of Mallory in that way.
Yeah, it's really cool. For wardrobe, we kind of came to the conclusion that most of Mallory's wardrobe is just various pieces that she's either like thrifted or found, or like in the later year took from a lost and found box at her place of work and stuff like that. She comes from a very lower class family, and so I think, you know, she has all this like all these crazy pieces of clothing that she wears all at once sometimes, but that's how she expresses herself. She's like, I don't care. I don't care if I'm wearing 3 patterns at once. Like I look cool, and like I'm wearing these men's slacks with like, I don't know, some crazy hairstyle. I don't know. It's just I love her sense of style, and like it gets darker and more put together like as the years go on. But I just kind of love the idea of like she just acquires all the, like she absolutely doesn't shop at any mainstream stores, and she just acquires clothing from wherever, and then just, I assume, like has it in one pile on the floor and then just like pulls from it.
And because you were mentioning earlier how there was a whole year between shooting the pilot and shooting the rest of the season, and obviously the way that everything is filmed now is so monumentally different, how was that a really wildly different process in terms of rehearsals, being able to have in-depth conversations, and the way that you were able to go in and work on scenes together, because all of that's much more challenging at this point. And so how did that really differ from the way that you shot the pilot to the way that you came back and all shot the rest of the season?
It was honestly, it was hard at times because you just want to like give your friends a hug and like be able to talk to them and sit down and like talk about what you're about to film and stuff. And we kind of figured it out as we went along. And I think that's everybody who's working during this time. It's an entirely different world. It feels like a completely different experience than working during non-COVID times. And so it took some figuring out for sure. But I think that also maybe allowed for us all to work more individually, like figure that out for ourselves. And of course, we had our wonderful showrunner, Tia Napolitano, and Bill Purple, executive or directing producer, who I always ask so many questions to. But it definitely made me work harder individually. Because there weren't rehearsals and things like that, and sometimes there weren't even table reads. So it was very much like we're figuring this out, figuring out how to do this all together. So yeah, it was different, but it was amazing at the same time.
And you talked a little bit earlier about, what your approach and your method and your process is as an actor. And it sounds like after you did Yoga Hosers, that was a period of time in particular where you went into coaching and taking classes and working with acting coaches very specifically. And so when you did that, what were some of the things that you really wanted to be able to develop in yourself, in your craft, and to really be able to evolve in your style as an actor?
Yeah, Yoga Hosers is definitely not my finest moment. I think it's, I feel obviously so it's insane to be like, oh, I want to be an actor, and then somebody writes a movie for you. That's insane, and it doesn't happen. I'm so grateful that happened, and that I still don't understand how that happened. But at the same time, I had no idea what I was doing. I had absolutely no clue what I was doing. And once I saw that, I was like, oh, okay. I have a lot to learn. And so at times it's kind of like embarrassing that exists in the world, because I see myself and I'm like, oh my God. But after that, I went into years of coaching and training with my mentors, Deb Aquila and Donna Morong, and they taught me everything I know. So seeing yoga, it's so funny to talk about. Seeing Yoga Hosers was definitely a wake-up call to I didn't even realize there was a craft. Like I didn't understand any of it. I had literally no idea what I was doing. But then I was like, oh, this is a skill that you work on. And then I worked my ass off and put my heart and soul into training and coaching, and I grew a lot. And realized like the different methods and learned about it, and the craft per se, and how to be the best version of myself as an actor. And I learned so much from Deb and Donna, and they teach two different methods of acting, and I lean towards the Adler method, and that's been my way of doing things for the past few years. And I owe Deb and Donna everything.
And you've also stepped into directing, and your first foray into that was in shooting a music video with your band at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. And when you went into that project, how did you set about thinking about what type of director you wanted to be and how you wanted to work with the rest of the band, particularly because these are people that you already have relationships with and you already know what their work dynamic and approach is. So what was the style that you wanted to have as a director, both in terms of working with them and visually?
For sure. I mean, that was also like I'm figuring this out in the moment sort of thing. And like there were things that I took from my acting experiences. Now, having worked on a series, I feel like I understand everything so much more, because we were shooting it for 6 months. So I learned a lot in half a year. But I think when I shot the music video, it was such an incredible opportunity. Near the creative company behind it, just presented me with this beautiful opportunity to create something and to direct something for the first time. And they made me feel very safe, and they made it very comfortable. And whenever I listen to songs, whether it's my song or not, mostly not my songs, I always see something in my head. And I used to, when I was younger, like going to school and stuff, I'd be on the bus and I'd take up an entire bus bench and lay down and just like close my eyes and try to put, I would always like create trailers in my head to songs, like for like film trailers, which is a really bizarre thing. But I always just saw things like that, and similar to trailers as music videos. So I just kind of saw it in the same way. I envisioned what the music video would be like, and it was brought to life, and it blew my mind to see it exist. And that was such a special experience.
And with the fact that you were just saying how you've learned such a monumental amount in working on this series over the process of 6 months, what are some of the things that you feel that you've stepped away learning from that time?
Oh my gosh. So, I mean, I don't even know if I could pinpoint like one thing, because I feel like I evolved in most categories. I also just learned so much more about like cinematography. Oh, absolutely. I have no idea what I'm talking about. Like there's so much I don't understand, but like I understood more about how that even works, and different directors' techniques. Like we had I think 5 different directors for the series, and working with each of them, and they all had completely different styles of directing. So working with each of them and seeing their approach taught me so much about how I want to work as a director and how I think I would be thinking in that position, and what I would want to do and stuff like that. And how to talk to actors, how to talk to everybody, more lingo that I've never understood, like things like that. So overall, I just feel like I learned so much.
Yeah, well, I'm so enthralled by the series so far. I can't wait to watch the rest of it. Thank you so much for this great Q&A.
Thank you so much for having me.